Hola, me llamo Teddy. Hoy escuchas a Mayra Macías de Latino Victory Fund en Two Broads Talking Politics. Vota, por favor.
Hi, everyone. This is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, and I'm on today with Mayra Macías, who is the Executive Director of Latino Victory Fund. And we're going to talk some about the debate and some about the 2020 election. So hello, Mayra.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks for having me. I love the title.
Thank you. Thanks. So I am excited to be talking to you anyway, but this is also during Hispanic Heritage Month. So it's really important. Latino voters are such an important part of any election, but especially this 2020 election. So could you start by giving us some context? What is Latino Victory Fund and what is your role there?
Yes. So Latino Victory Fund is a national organization that seeks to build Latino political power. And we do that in two main ways. One is by mobilizing Latino voters to get out and vote. As you said, we're 34 days away. In this election cycle, Latino voters are the largest non-white ethnic voting bloc with 32 million eligible voters. But unfortunately, just because we have 32 million eligible doesn't mean that all those folks are registered to vote. So one of the ways that we seek to build power is ensuring that folks have the tools to register, to make a plan, and actually turn out to vote. The second way that we build Latino political power, it's through our candidate work. So we support and endorse progressive Latino candidates up and down the ballot because we have seen that when Latino candidates are on the ballot, it encourages Latino voters to come out and vote. And I'll share a quick statistic just to underscore why organizations like Latino Victory are so important at a time like this. So while we're the largest non-white ethnic voting bloc, we also are 18% of the population, and yet we are only 1% of all elected officials. So that disparity is really, really stark and a reminder of just how much work we still have to do. And so a lot of times it's like this cyclical thing where Latinos don't engage in the civic process because they don't see themselves represented. They don't see Latino elected officials or folks who are speaking their language or understand their culture. And so the work that we do, again, really is to build political power by supporting these local candidates who are going to do that work of being that entry point for many Latino voters in service of making sure that we fulfill our political potential, which this cycle's 32 million strong. And I'm serving as the executive director. I started in 2017 as a political director, and it has been quite the ride. But I couldn't imagine being anywhere else 34 days away from this election cycle.
Yeah, and those voters are not spread out equally among all states, and in fact are fairly concentrated in a lot of the swing states right now.
Yes. So very timely conversation, because part of what is very frustrating, and I feel like we sound like a broken record, is that beginning in 2019, really as soon as 2016 ended, we saw that many of these swing state elections were decided, or rather the margins could have been made up by Latino voters. So a state like Florida, for instance, Donald Trump won Florida by 112,000 voters. There were over 1 million Latinos that were eligible to vote and did not vote. And very similar stories are applicable to states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Arizona, Texas. And so truly, the Latino vote will determine who gets elected to the White House, because many of these swing states, that margin of victory runs through the Latino vote. And so we're doing everything we can to make sure that our community has the tools, again, to register, to make a plan to vote, and then the information to actually turn out and vote on election day or earlier.
So I want to talk some about this debacle that was the debate last night. I guess to start, was there anything that surprised you? I mean, I think, there was a lot that was sort of weird and uncomfortable and horrifying, but were there things that surprised you? Was it more or less what you expected, maybe just to a different degree?
It was hard to watch, especially the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
right? It was very disappointing because the first 5 to 10 minutes, the moderator nor Vice President Joe Biden could get anything across because Donald Trump just kept disrupting the entire conversation. And regardless of whether one voted for him or not, this is the man that represents us at the highest office in this country. And to see his juvenile behavior and distraction, I don't know that I was surprised, but I was truly speechless. And if I'm a voter that's not typically engaged, I can imagine how off-putting that is. You tune in, you're ready to hear these presidential candidates talk about the issues, and you literally cannot hear anything that is being conveyed because Donald Trump has disrupted the entire conversation. And I'm a former middle school teacher, and I could not help but draw parallels.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I first started teaching, one of the hardest lessons for me was to, find my voice as an authority figure. And very early on, you learn to pick up the signs. Students who would disrupt the classroom or act out, it was because they were covering up for the fact that they, were struggling to read or didn't want to show vulnerabilities in their academic skill set. And I couldn't help but draw those parallels that Donald Trump was distracting from the conversation, because for those of us who have seen the last 4 years of his administration, who are following this campaign, know that he has no concrete plans to put this country in the path that it needs to be on, to recover from this global pandemic, to heal after such a divisive time that we're living in. And instead, he just resorted to disrupting the entire conversation.
So there, of course, wasn't as much a focus on issues as there could have been since there was so much disruption. But what were the issues that they discussed that you think are really going to resonate with Latino voters? And do you think that that Biden was speaking to those issues? Clearly, Trump wasn't speaking to any issues, but was Biden speaking to those issues in a way that you think will resonate?
Well, I love that question, Kelly, because this is something that is top of mind for Latinos, but also top of mind for Americans. And that's how do we overcome this global pandemic? And as you know, and many folks have pointed out, COVID-19 shed a light on the inequities that already existed in our government, in society, in our country. And particularly for Latinos, this was acutely felt. One, because we have the highest rate of uninsurance. So even after the ACA, which helped insure millions of Latinos, there are still so many folks in the Latino community that don't have access to healthcare. Two, we are overrepresented in essential workers, farm workers, domestic workers, service industry jobs. Latinos are overrepresented in those fields. And so it is no surprise that we were disproportionately affected by COVID-19. And so I very, very much appreciated those moments when Vice President Biden, looked directly to the camera, because it was clear you can have a conversation or a debate with Donald Trump. So he looked directly at the camera and he talked to the American people about what he was going to do to build back this country better than it is now. And one of those things that I think more America wants to hear, in particular the Latino community, is how are we going to overcome this pandemic? How are we making sure that whoever is president in 2020 is reimagining the ways that we center the most vulnerable in our community, so that we are increasing access to healthcare, but also that we're protecting workers, that we are recognizing that workers who were far too often vulnerable to abuse in their workplace have really been the saviors of our country during this time. And so I appreciated Vice President Biden uplifting that very real pain that this country is feeling, uplifting and honoring the over 200,000 lives that have been lost. And within the Latino community, that number is now 40,000 lives lost due to COVID.
I think another issue that we're finally talking about in 2020, and clearly too late, but at least we're finally talking about it, climate change. And I know that climate change disproportionately affects Latinos, is really important to the communities, and especially the states where Latinos are likely to be living are often the states that are being hit really hard. Were you happy to hear the plans that Biden has on climate change? Do you think that is an issue, that is going to be something that is driving Latino voters to the polls?
I love that you asked that question, because very often, we associate climate change and the climate movement with not with people of color. So we associate it with white voters or something that appeals to the white community, when in fact, climate change and preserving our climate is a top polling issue for Latino voters. I always joke around that many of our parents, and mine in particular, are conservationists without even knowing it. They recycle. They're very green when it comes to just preserving like energy in the home and reusing like take out Tupperware. And it's like an ongoing joke, but we really are conservationists and care about this planet. And so I was very, very surprised in a good way that the question came up, because initially I didn't think it was going to come up, and I know it was towards the end. And it is such an issue that's been top of mind because of everything happening on the West Coast with the wildfires. Mm-hmm. And really, we have a candidate in South Florida who is, I joke around, he's our champion of climate change, because he has been advocating for this issue before it was, in vogue. And we had an event with him recently. His name is Florida State Senator Jose Javier Rodriguez, and he walks around the Tallahassee Capitol with rain boots, because he's never missing an opportunity to take a stance on just how important of an issue it is to tackle both at the local level and at the national level, and particularly in his district, which is Miami, where every year, the hurricane season lasts a little longer. We saw what happened post-Hurricane Maria and how that the lack of infrastructure and responding to it has really affected the lives and cost almost 5,000 lives, Puerto Rican lives. And so I bring him up because he was joking around and said, it is great that we are finally able to talk about this issue, and it is a top issue that voters care about, because for so long it was an afterthought. And I give so much credit to the youth who have been rallying around climate change and really holding our leaders accountable to talk about it, and taking us to task to plan, because we don't have a lot of time to get this right. And so love that the question was asked. Loved that Vice President Joe Biden acknowledged that he believed in science. I'm embarrassed to say that that's even up for debate. Yeah. And I am looking forward to having a president who believes in science, so that we can, join the Paris Climate Accords again and really find science-based solutions to take us forward so that we can preserve this planet for the future generations.
So I almost hate to talk about it, but I don't think we can discuss the debate without talking about it, and that is Trump refusing to denounce white supremacy, white supremacist. I'm not even sure I know where to go with that, but when you see that happen, I mean, it's horrifying for me as a white middle class person in this country, but what in the world does that feel like to these millions of Latino voters who are seeing this person who is supposed to be the head of this country, and this country that is, has for so long been seen as like this place you want to go for freedom, and what does that mean to have something like that happen on a national stage?
The saddest part of that comment is that I wasn't even surprised. And I think that for me is the most heart-wrenching part is I was speechless, but I wasn't surprised because Donald Trump literally began his campaign on the backs of Latinos. And it has really just gotten worse since then. I mean, he started off name calling, denigrating Mexicans. A year ago in El Paso, we saw the culmination of what happens when white supremacists feel emboldened by the anti-Latino xenophobic rhetoric that this president constantly uses. And so whether or not Donald Trump intends to incite violence, we've seen an increase in hate crimes. Part of what Latino Victory did after the El Paso massacre is that we went to Texas and we held a series of town halls with the aim of two things. One, we wanted to be there for our community. This was the largest massacre of Latinos in modern history. And two, we wanted to gauge how the community was feeling and how this tragic incident either galvanized community members to be more civically engaged. And so we hosted a series of town halls, began in El Paso with Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, who is truly a hero, and the way that she handled and helped her community heal is so admirable. And we went to Dallas, San Antonio, Houston. We also did a series of focus groups and a national poll. And what was truly fascinating from that entire tour was that regardless of party affiliation, Latinos were quickly making the connection between the increase in hate crimes, their increased fear of another mass shooting happening or being the target of a hate crime, connecting that directly to Donald Trump. And I think for us, that was something very shocking because Texas is seen as this deep red state, a gun-toting state. And again, regardless of party, Latino voters were making that connection. And so I feel like on the one hand, again, we're not surprised because this has been happening. And on the other hand, the culmination of his rhetoric in this tragic shooting in El Paso was this watershed collective moment for the Latino community, where for many of us who are privileged and our 13th generation and don't really have to grapple with the immigration story anymore, it didn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if you're an immigrant or not. It doesn't matter if you speak English or not. It doesn't matter if you are light-skinned Latino or a dark Latino. The target was on our back. And it's the first time that I felt as a community that we all felt that. And so it's not surprising. I was speechless, but I think for me that created more of a sense of urgency. If I thought I was working my butt off before to do everything I can to get the Biden-Harris ticket in the White House, there's even more urgency now, because if Donald Trump doesn't hesitate to use a national debate platform to encourage these white supremacists, then another 4 years without the accountability of a re-election is terrifying. And it's a matter of life or death for my people.
what can we all be doing? What can listeners be doing to make sure, first of all, that that Latino voters have the information they need to register to vote, to get out the vote, and that they're not scared. When there is a target on people's backs and there is all this, inciting of violence, that they are not scared to go out and vote.
Yeah, the biggest thing, and I appreciated the contrast, because towards the end of the debate, we saw Vice President Biden empowering voters, telling them to go visit iwillvote.com to make a plan and get the resources to go out and actually vote. Whereas Donald Trump ended the debate sowing seeds of doubt about the integrity of our election, making folks question whether or not voting by mail is a safe and secure option. And what is very important for everyone listening is, for those of you that are able to vote, voting is the minimum. There are so many questions around the integrity of our election because of the comments that the president makes, that we need to ensure that we're using our platforms, and thank you, Kelly, for using yours, to ensure that all of our friends and family members are registered to vote. In many states, the voter registration deadlines are next week. But that we're also encouraging folks to make a plan, and to the extent possible that people are voting early. If health concerns are top of mind, because we still are in a global pandemic, that vote by mail is an option, but to encourage folks to do it early. And for those of you who are healthy, making sure that you volunteer to be a poll worker, because we know that there is a large amount of voters who are still going to vote on election day. And we want to make sure that we have the capacity to service everyone who is coming in to vote on election day, and that we have healthy bodies and healthy individuals doing that work, because very often it's elderly folks in our communities that volunteer to be poll workers, and we don't want to put anyone at risk, right? And someone should not have to forsake their health for voting. So we have a way for you all to check whether or not you're registered to vote. So you can text VOTO, VOTO 2020 to 52886. Again, that's VOTO space 2020 to 52886. And you type in your name, your address, and we will direct you to the correct Supervisor of Elections page where you can see if you're registered to vote. If you're not, you can register. You can see if there are options to vote early or vote by mail in your state, and just make a plan. And once you've done that, please send the link to 5 friends or family members to make sure that they are also registered to vote and have a plan, because we need to make sure that everyone in our network is equipped to go vote on November 3rd or earlier if possible.
Excellent. And if people would like to find out more about Latino Victory Fund, how can they do that?
We are on all of the social media. Our website is latinovictory.us, but you can also find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Our handle is Latino Victory US.
Excellent. And of course, people should look at all the down ballot candidates as well, because first of all, down ballot's important, but also getting people out to vote for down ballot helps up the ticket too.
Really does. And people don't think about that. But again, oftentimes your city councilor, for my Chicagoans, your alderman, alderwoman, right, your school board member, those are the people that can speak to those local issues, who really have much more impact on your day-to-day life than these national or federal elections. And they're the first entry point for many individuals. So support your down ballot candidates, research your down ballot candidates. And if you've already done all of the things we've outlined above, they need help too. Right now, there's a lot of emphasis on the presidential, rightfully so, but volunteer for your local down ballot elected officials or candidates, make some calls, text some people, because all of that matters. It's not just about the top of the ticket. It's about every elected office, because all those functions represent a specific aspect of government that impact our everyday life. Well,
Mayra, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with me today. This was really excellent. I think what you're doing, this work is so important. And clearly this is a very, very important group of voters. And so thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at twobroadstalk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.